We hear a lot about dark patterns, but what about light ones? Or at least dark patterns used for good? Ejnar Håkonsen has studied both the light and dark side of player manipulation. He's designed matchmaking systems and pay-to-win games, and he's rolled with top-ranking global whale guilds to better understand the strategies they use. A few years ago, Ejnar designed a multiplayer system that manipulated players to positive ends. It used commendations in a kind of genius way to reduce toxicity by weaponizing a player's ego against them. Today, we'll talk to Ejnar about how this system works and how we can take it in new directions. Enjoy.
I was really fascinated when I went from having a clinical therapy practice and then back into game design and found that many game designers are actually operating on a very high psychological level. There's still a bunch of specialist expertise you can bring into it, but just the baseline psychological level among game designers is impressively high.
That's interesting. When you say that you had like a medical practice, so I guess that was in the field of psychology, you would say?
Not fully. I actually learned hypnosis from some of the best in the world, even though my formal education is in computer science. So I've spent all of my adult life in the scientific communities, which meant that when I went into learning hypnotherapy from some of the best in the world, I had this filter of actually checking where can I replicate results, which stuff is superstition, and where can I create outsized impact. And that turned out to be a really powerful combination.
Is that using hypnotherapy to get people to do things like stopping smoking or stop overeating and things like that?
Not really. I do deep identity level work. If someone comes in as like, I want to feel better and I'm not quite sure how, or someone comes in and says, I have these deep issues, I've struggled with them for 20 years, I've seen 10 other therapists. And then because, again, I have the scientific background, so I want to challenge myself, challenge my beliefs, make sure I do what works. I didn't want to get lumped in with like homeopathy and anti-vaxxers, so I established a results guarantee. So I mainly have like leaders, engineers, programmers, people who do not believe in hypnosis, but are willing to come and say, well, you have a results guarantee, so I'm open to trying it and see what it takes me. So I was quite proud that 80% of my clientele do not believe in hypnosis when they step in the door.
I think I did stumble across one of your posts as well that was talking about deliberately stepping out of your own worldview and into their worldview to better treat them. Is that right?
Very much so. It's essential, and that's also part of continually challenging your worldview, which is so important. Also, when you're looking at these problems like toxicity, which the entire industry has just been struggling with for decades, and saying, how can I come at this from different directions? You want to challenge your beliefs. You want to be able to look at things from different perspectives, look not just at the surface, but like second and third order impacts. That was one of the things my hypnosis mentor also stressed, that when you're working with someone, you do not get to pull your belief systems over them. You need to work within their belief systems, aligned with their belief systems, to make sure that you are understanding what they want to achieve and you're helping them alongside their own value system.
Because that, what you just described, it sounds to me like, the ethical standard for hypnotherapy. And also, what we're talking about in this podcast, in this episode, is kind of adjacent to nudge theory, I would say. Like, nudging gamers towards more positive behavior using various means. And the ethics of hypnotherapy sound like there's quite a lot of overlap with the ethics of nudge theory as well. It's like, not you have to be aware of what your worldview is and not imposing it on other people. And really, I guess, just targeting things that we can all agree are positive, such as treating people better.
Oh, yeah, sure. But I will just step in and say that when you're speaking about the ethical standards of nudge theory in game design and also in hypnotherapy, keep in mind both of those are pretty unregulated fields. I'm not quite sure about in the US. I think there are a bit more standards for therapy, but at least where I'm from, therapy is not... a therapist is a claim that anyone can make. So I've run a therapy practice, but it does not mean I need to have a license to do so, and that's very important. Hypnotherapy and hypnosis, they are not a science. They are a discipline like being a masseur. The study of what it does is within psychology. And both within hypnosis and within game design, you will find many people who are not ethical actors. Or that might be wrong, but within game design, certainly. Within hypnosis, you will just find a lot of people who might be impactful, might be helpful, but do not necessarily live to any consistent standards. So it's very important which standard you choose to hold yourself to, whether as a clinician or as a designer. One of the main concerns I saw, which was actually really interesting and not entirely misplaced, were people who are saying, this is like a CCP surveillance system. And of course, this indoctrination engine that I playfully called it very much helps positive things. But it is somewhat adjacent to something that could really be turned against people. So when you're designing these sorts of things, it's like in cybersecurity, they have this term, do not roll your own crypto. Like, have a professional do this stuff. And if you are a company where you don't know that you can encompass all belief systems, cultures, generations, if the person in charge of this were able to do stuff and the others would not feel safe challenging them on it, you are not the company who should be doing this. You should have some specialist in there, if that makes sense.
Interesting. So walk me through that again. So if you're designing a system and those around you feel like they can't challenge you?
I mean, we've seen some environments within game development, say Concord, I believe it was called, had this positive, toxic positivity culture, it was said. I do not know that personally. That's what was said. That some people had ideas and others were not feeling safe in challenging those ideas. And if ever you have a culture where there's not room for anyone to disagree, anyone to challenge your ideas, or if someone is doing something and it does not invite others to come and say, hey, you could be off track here, or could this be harmful in some way, or are we only looking at the surface level consequences? You want an environment that inspires challenge, that inspires adversarial testing, that invites adversarial testing, that invites red teaming of everything you're doing. And if you do not have that, if you have an environment where agreement is mandatory, where you feel like you are not safe to speak your beliefs or to challenge systems, then that is a very unsafe environment to be doing behavioral engineering on like a population scale.
Right.
Because if you step off the track, there's no one there to stop you, and you might not even have anyone to help you realize if you stepped off that track.
The age-old story, emperor's new clothes and being surrounded by yes people and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And for any sort of systems design, it's just so important to challenge your systems.
And you kind of, like when you started working at BetaDwarf, this was a team, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was a team that was, I guess, went semi-viral for living in a classroom in a university, illegal and undetected for about 7 months. And they, after they got caught, they then found a house to live in, and they still worked and lived together in the house for some time after that. So this was a team, I guess, that was, quite comfortable with being in close proximity. And also, I imagine their communication must have been pretty good for all of that to work. But what stage did you come into that? Was that after all of that happened?
Yes. So I missed the beginning. So while they were doing that, they were working on their very first game, Forced, which remains to this day one of the best co-op games I've ever tried. So when I finished university and wanted to get into my dream job as a game designer, they were number one on the list because I had tried that game with some of my partners and absolutely loved it, and saw that as a place where I could do meaningful systems design. And I applied and I got in as an intern initially, and then more and more as part of the team. And I was able to pretty quickly do a bunch of things on the systems side with raising the standards for game balance and looking into progression systems, stuff like that. But was still more of a generalist at the beginning. What happened as we were working on the second game was that we had not really done market testing, and the entire marketing angle of the company was just like, well, we don't really know marketing. We can do some viral posts sometimes, but we don't know anything about marketing. So we made this really cool game with a bunch of marketing failures, and it released something like a 94% Steam score or something outrageous. It was a really fun and good game, which fell through completely at launch. So there wasn't the money to hire me permanently. And I decided, okay, I am learning so much from hypnosis. I'm able to help myself. I'm able to help my friends. I knew I could grow a lot by doing this professionally. So if ever I had to do that, this would be the time. So I launched my own clinical practice, initially working on some sessions with people who knew that I was just starting up, and then escalating to professional practice, and immediately just establishing a results guarantee because I'd found that I could do stuff others could not achieve. And then I did that for a number of years. And about the time when it was really becoming self-reinforcing and word of mouth was just giving me a steady stream of clients, COVID hit. And just around that time, BetaDwarf got massive investment for their new flagship project, which was focused on pro-social outcomes and friendshipping. So they wanted to bring me in as a consultant. But I still had my clinical practice. So I was actually doing that part-time. So I was spending 3 to 4 days a week working deep on algorithms and spreadsheets and systems with BetaDwarf, and 1 to 2 days a week in deep one-on-one identity level discussions and personal growth with my therapy clients. It was actually really great for my professional and personal growth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so this flush of investment that BetaDwarf secured, was that was part of the investment program specifically to work on pro-social games?
It was a general corporate investment, and that pitch was very much that loneliness is a massive epidemic. I think the WHO said loneliness is about as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and it's an even wider scale epidemic. And BetaDwarf said, we want to fix this. We want to make a game that creates this sort of deep social cohesion and communities that you knew back from World of Warcraft, but without being life-consuming in the amount of time it requires from you. And that was part of the pitch that got that investment.
Excellent.
And it was very much investment that was still focused on this is going to make money, but it's also going to have a good impact. And whenever I've been working on monetization and stuff like that, I've also looked at those places where ethics and profit align. Because we've all seen places where companies just screw over their own products by some very exploitative monetization, but something that's really not thought through.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, your article about AFK Arena kind of highlighted that as well, like how the company making it introduced an update that was quite greedy in terms of trying to make a profit, and ended up kind of, not killing the game, but certainly lowering its player base and its revenue. And I think, there's probably some people out there who do think that you have to choose between making a profit and doing social good. But as we'll get into in this chat, one thing that you talked about with your time at BetaDwarf was that this sort of pro-social matchmaking system that you designed made people want to play the game more. And so, it was not just about doing good. It was actually great for the game. And I guess it's heartening to hear that the investors understood that at an early stage, that they specifically heard a pitch about a pro-social game and wanted to invest in that.
I mean, look at Ghost Ship Games, who made Deep Rock Galactic. That game is just printing money, and I believe they have way more money than they know what to do with at this point. And a lot of it is just that they've built really wholesome communities and a great and inviting co-op space. And if you can do that for a game, you gain not just short-term profits, but long-term customer loyalty and investment and trust. Whereas look at something like Diablo Immortal. That's the example I was bringing up in all my job interviews, because when you're working as someone who also specializes in monetization, you really want to screen your clients and see, are they on board with actually doing something that's in the player's interests? And when they asked for examples of failed monetization, I would always bring up Diablo Immortal, and they were like, but why? That game made a lot of money. Well, yes, but did you see how? Because they were just taking all of that built up trust and loyalty and brand value and just strip mining it for short-term profit. So if you're looking at it in a broader scope with actually second and third order impacts, then it just cost Blizzard so much to make that type of game. Whereas if you just look at the product and nothing else about the entire Blizzard ecosystem, then sure, it was profitable. And you kind of want to screen for those people in suits who just destroy all the value and all the customer trust and all the game experience and just fail upwards, and then leave the developers and the players to deal with all the fallout.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many who would agree that Blizzard has spent a lot of their goodwill in recent years, and I'm sure some would argue that they're in the negative at this point. Which is a shame because, from time to time when I play a Blizzard game and I deal with their support, it's very clear to me, or interview some of their developers, like it's very clear that there's still some great people working there, great artists and people who really care about the company. But then you see, things like what you're talking about. And yeah, it's sad.
But
Just
yeah, for the
quickly.
most part, the developers very much love the idea of putting the players and the gameplay first. It's so easy to get allies among the developers. It's making sure that you can translate that to terms that the executives understand, where they have a business case they can justify to the board or whatever for why going in this direction that also serves the player base is actually the right thing to do.
And when you say, I just wanted to dive in for like a short moment on what you mentioned about game designers just sort of naturally having a high kind of IQ when it came to psychology. Do you find that this comes as a result of just the process of making prototypes and playtesting, or is this due to recommended reading within game design circles? Why do you think that is?
I mean, I may be biased just from the companies I've seen, so there could be a lot of cultural divergence and stuff like that. But I will say that games overlap a lot with applied psychology. So it's not so much that they understand a ton of the psychological research, but just the intuitive understanding of psychological behaviors and how what they're doing is going to affect experiences. There is a significant comprehension there, and I'm not sure it's so much apply recommended reading as it's just actually training those patterns. There's some really fascinating research within psychology that your outcomes to a large extent depend on which sort of behaviors the clinician is able to live. Like, do they meet you with warmth? Do they listen to you? Are they willing to challenge you? Are they themselves realizing their potential in some way and want the same thing? There's like a list of behaviors where you can look at these and they correlate extremely with outcomes, actually to a larger extent than just your education within psychology. And this can be kind of fun because the kind of people who get selected for psychology education correlates inversely with those things.
Really?
Because that can often be the more academic and less naturally social types.
Okay, right.
And then the people who are professors in psychology often correlate further negatively with that and can influence their students further. So I'm not saying that psychology is anything negative, but it's just many psychology educations are very much focused on theoretical research. So some of those educations can be very much divorced from actually learning hands-on interactions with shaping experiences or outcomes for people. Whereas for game designers, particularly those who engage with rapid prototyping, who listen to their users, that is what they're doing so much. So, I mean, if you were to put them in a psychology context, there would be a ton of blind spots. But within the context they're dealing with, they actually have more practice than the average person who is just graduated from a 5-year psychology degree.
Yeah, I mean,
Again,
some of the
depending
things...
a lot on where you take those degrees. There's so much variance, and also across cultures and countries, all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, some of the things that you mentioned, like, does it challenge you instead of just agreeing with you? Does it greet you with warmth and stuff? Like, some of those things could be applied to games, and it's sort of like the mark of a good game. And so I guess in that sense, a good game designer would have an intuition for those things. I'm kind of reminded of Sid Meier's memoir as well, which I was going through a little while ago. And, I think it was maybe 60, 70% of the way through the book. He mentions that he always felt that players needed to win 70% of the time in order to feel like they had won 50% of the time.
Yeah.
And, it occurred to me that he's basically stumbled on loss aversion, which, like Daniel Kahneman would talk about in something like Thinking Fast and Slow, where we're more sensitive to loss than we are to gain.
Yeah, I've actually worked on matchmaking systems for a number of games because that's also part of where the psychological insight can be quite helpful. So initially, I was just helping our cloud engineer implement the matchmaking system and thinking about, okay, what sort of experiences do we want to shape here? And then eventually I built on that expertise and developed matchmaking systems for other companies. And part of what you can do is think about, what are the sort of negative experiences we want to avoid and how can we engineer that to avoid those? Say, how do we break up more loss streaks or make sure that we avoid the situations that make people churn, that is, stop playing. So how can we raise our retention by actually improving the matchmaker?
Well, that's a great segue into talking about the MOBA game that you worked on.
Yeah.
When you were at BetaDwarf, they had this game that they had investment for. They had the idea for a game that would be pro-social, contribute to solving the loneliness epidemic and get players to play more positively with reduced toxicity. So the genre, of course, that they picked for that was MOBA.
Yeah.
Which is anyone who. So for those who don't know, it stands for Multiplayer Online Battle Arena. But these are typically one of the worst genres for player toxicity. Usually, it's a 5 versus 5 setup where when you die, you actually feed the enemy team resources, and then that kind of leads to this blame game where people say, "Well, why did you die?" And then they say, "Well, why didn't you heal me? I thought we were going in for a team fight," and et cetera, et cetera. And it's a genre that's very known for its hostility. And this game that you designed this system for is PVE, so it's player versus environment, which means the players are tackling challenges of just sort of computer enemies and computer bosses. But there's still a lot of toxicity in PVE games. I can think of a lot of World of Warcraft raids that didn't go as well as I'd hoped. And so in this PVE sort of MOBA environment, can you describe the system that you designed and how it reduced toxicity?
Yeah. So the concept was a 3-person PvE MOBA. So taking the entire MOBA gameplay of controlling one hero and having various skills used in top-down environments. So a bit Diablo-like, but closer to League of Legends or Dota in playstyle. And making that cooperative against PvE content, which was a real challenge in its own right. And then the system I designed struck on multiple fronts to improve friendshipping and reduce toxicity. So one of the things I identified in MOBAs was that people seem to be always on edge and afraid to be the one or the ones who were getting flamed. When I was playing MOBAs, I looked for opportunities to preemptively avoid that. Like whenever someone was doing something and I had any excuse to just say, well played, smiley, I would do so, because as soon as I did that to each player at some point in the game, the pressure was slightly off. Like, okay, now I can screw up and not have everyone just flaming me to all hell. And the issue seemed to be that you are playing with strangers and you do not know whether they are good or bad, and you have no validation of them, and you know that you sometimes get matched with terrible players. So people can fail once, and then the pressure is even more on them because then their allies start flaming them, and then they start just tilting and failing even more, and everything just goes downhill from there.
It's a slippery slope.
Very much so. That was one aspect. And another aspect was that there's a lot of social connection that's often missing in games nowadays. All of these convenient auto-join guilds or raids or whatever, where you don't really get the chance to meet up and bond with people. And even within that, when I did connect with people, I would find myself in some games having a friend list of like 30, 40 people where I knew what each of them. I'd had a great experience at some point, but I do not remember more than 5 of these. Why do I not remember them? It would be so great and such low-hanging fruit if I could just remember that and take up that connection, but we've both forgotten at this point. So I wanted to really do a combined system that leveraged some of that and actually made some automatic notes so that you know those people you've played with. So no, oh, at this date you gave each other this commendation for this rate or whatever. Just some simple notes that you remember. Oh, it was this thing. Sure, we can follow up on that. And then from that, engineering those sorts of notes and the capability for a system to generate them to also generate social proof. So when you are playing with someone, you might give them commendations. And I would stress that this should not be something where you are given rewards for giving commendations. It should not be that you feel compelled to. So you have a limited amount of commendations to give. So you have always an out for why you did not give them. You also do not just give them on autopilot as in some games. And then when you give commendations, you are told that this increases the odds of meeting those players again. So anyone you like playing with, your natural incentive as a player, and it's important we align with this so that the optimal way to engage as a player in this system is to do what the system wants. That is to give commendations to the people you want to play more with. And then what the system does eventually is that when you get matched with new people, it looks for what is the best social validation I can give here. So it might be that you are told, oh, you gave this player a commendation for saving your ass twice. And then when that player fails, you might not remember who they were and why you gave that commendation. But you know that, well, I gave him a commendation in the past, so he's clearly not bad, or she's clearly not bad. And that just gives more leeway for failure and for supporting them, because at that point, your ego is already invested. Well, I have good judgment. I have rewarded this player. I've seen this player someone I enjoyed playing with. So clearly it's just a good player who's having a bad day. And the more you can build that feeling, that just helps forgiveness. It helps support. It takes off the pressure so people have less reason to just both tilt themselves and also less reason to strike out at others. It's kind of the dynamic of a bully who lashes out to avoid getting bullied themselves, right? Or at least in some cases, that's part of the problem. It should be stressed with all of this. Nothing is a silver bullet. All of this is just striking at what is the low-hanging fruit in all these sorts of systems, and it all adds up to something that should be way better than what we came from. So that's one way to go about it, that it says, you gave this person a commendation. But we can scale that, because you can also say, well, your friend gave this person a commendation, or this person has received good communication commendations from people you gave good communication commendations, or something like that. So that way it mathematically scales, because as soon as you go out like one link further, it's just exponentially more social validation you can draw on. And the beautiful thing is that much of this stuff is permanent and just increases over time. So for all players who have played for a long time in the game, like if you played League of Legends for just 2 years, some people have played way longer, you might have, in this sort of system where it tells you that you are rewarded for giving commendations, like you get to play more with the people you enjoy playing with by giving them commendations. You might have given out 1,000 commendations or more. You might have made a bunch of friends because the system encourages making friends. So there's all this sort of both first degree and second degree validation to draw on. And then, of course, the system is able to also match you with people that it already sees has some validation from you or your peers. So it will still prioritize making good matches in terms of MMR and match quality and stuff like that. But there is some extent of tiebreaker potential where, well, all of these would be good matchups, but now we can place more people with people that they have validation for, that they've already reported they enjoy playing with. So at that point, it's actually also not just an illusion, but true that you are nudging the system towards matching you with the players you reported.
Yeah.
I enjoyed these.
Yeah. And it's, I guess that aspect of it, I mean, the sky's the limit, right? I mean, because in the game that you're talking about, you prioritized skill matchmaking first and then used commendations as a tie break to sort of match people with people that they had, given some praise to. But other developers could adapt that system in a range of different ways, right?
Yeah, and skill here is actually just a proxy for game quality, because there might be a number of things. It might be, say, if you have a team that needs a healer and a tank and needs balanced skill levels or whatever. Just look at what is the good quality matchmaking, and then you can still nudge it a bit based on how we match people up with those that we know they enjoy playing with, or people who they have some validation for.
Yeah, I love that because I mean, especially, when it's like you're using the person's praise against them in a way, but in a positive way where it's like, if you said that this person did a great move or, had great communication about a week ago, and if you see that person having a bad game, it's so much harder for you to say that they're just an outright bad player because
Yeah,
you're reminded, well, you praised this person a week ago, so were you wrong then or are you wrong now?
yeah.
Like,
And again, it's important to note that these are things that are within the person's own value system to a large extent. Uh,
mm,
like when you're making these sorts of interventions with people, all I'm doing here is actually making information apparent to them that, hey, you don't need to be as worried with this player. You can already trust this player. You've already established that. I'm just letting you know about this.
mm,
And then if that player screws up, then you already know that, well, sure, they're human, but they're clearly not completely useless. It's not the matchmaker's personal punishment on me that I got matched with that guy.
yeah,
Um, and also to that extent, when you're helping people become more of what they want to be within their own value
mm,
system, like I think most people would love to be able to chill more when they're playing these games, to be less on edge, to have an easier time trusting others and making friends, um, and to meet others with more patience and positivity, but that they also just feel like both, well, I have to be so on edge for whether someone is just completely screwing up and cannot be trusted, and also I have to be on edge because otherwise I might be the one getting flamed.
yeah,
So the more you can take away those things and let people actually just relax and enjoy the game, um, and highlight and make it easier and more convenient to seize on both the positive interactions with each other and actually forming good social connections, then for the vast majority of people, that plays into their value system of both what do I want to get out of this game and also what sort of person do I want to be.
mm. That's Einar, the hypnotist coming through,
Very much so.
stepping into other people's value systems.
Yes, it's kind of fun because I learned from one of the best hypnotists in the world. I learned from a bunch, but my main mentor was one of the best in the world. And he has one of the most intrusive technical styles of all hypnotists out there. Like if he was a surgeon, he'd have the sharpest scalpel. And that's a set I'm trained in. And like with a surgeon, you want the person who can get right in there and make the intervention smoothly, right? But within that community, when we were flying in from 6 continents and meeting as veterans, I became known for the personal style of being the person who thought most about safeguarding and how can I use responsibility to leverage this. There was one conference where we were being taught highly intrusive techniques, like, of course, with consent, right? How do you go beyond resistance to really work on the deep identity level stuff? And one of the other students was not comfortable that his skill set was up to the task, and he wanted to watch. And he watched me and he said, that did not feel intrusive at all. And but what I actually was doing was I learned that person's value set, because as long as I'm helping you become more of what you want to be, you have no resistance against that. Um, so the more I'm able to operate within your value system, the more I'm able to read you correctly and act with responsibility, the more it raises the ceiling on my potential impact. And
Mm.
the more I can really just have outsized leverage in what I'm able to do.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. And I guess the game version of that, porting that over to what we're talking about with the game, the sort of game version of that would be coming up with categories and dimensions of commendations that resonate with different people. Because I was wondering, when I was looking into this, I was wondering if any particular dimensions were more effective than others, because you've got some that are about praising another person's communication. You've got some that are about, oh, this person, you and they had a great moment. And there are some that are more social, saying that this person is a friend of a friend. And so I was wondering if like any type was more effective than any other type. But I guess certain types might just be more effective among different value systems. Would you say that?
It could be, but I think something that many commenters pointed out, which was not really a surprise to me, is that most commendations are given simply because a player is good in these games. Like, you enjoy
Yeah,
playing with people who make your team work better. So I think for the most part, you should expect there is good communication and shot calling and just making the team flow better. And then there is all of the stuff that basically boils down to this was a good player and I enjoyed playing with them.
sure.
Some games, particularly the more naturally social and less competitive ones, may more naturally open up to have a wider range. But for the most part, it will boil down to was this player good, and possibly was this player good in a way that raised the team rather than just their own personal mechanics. Um,
Absolutely.
and then people said, but then there's just the bad players who never get commendations. Well, in that case, your matchmaking system is failing because you will be matched with people around your own skills. So if there is someone who is bad, then they will be matched with other people who are equally
Yeah,
bad until they are the relatively good person.
yeah,
And
yeah.
put them in their natural environment, then they will get commendations. And if you gave that person a commendation and you went up 2 leagues, then at some point they may only have gone on one league, but they are still better than the time that you actually gave them that commendation 3 months ago.
It's kind of a funny scenario to think that someone, might rise to like platinum rank on communication alone without being able to hit the shot,
I mean, when I was playing MOBAs, that was me to some extent. I rose to Diamond in Heroes of the Storm, which I quite enjoyed.
Oh yeah, I love that game. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, did a lot of interesting things. And I was always better at empowering the team and strategy and communication than mechanics alone. I mean, I was by no means a bad player on mechanics, but because I had a relative strength in communication and making the team flow well together, that meant that I was higher MMR than I would have been if judged by my mechanics alone.
Absolutely. And that's one of those games where like, it's better to make the wrong decision as a group than it is to make the right decision individually. So communication is very important in that regard.
Yes, definitely. And with some caveats, because there are times when you just see, well, the entire group is absolutely going to die right now. And
Yeah.
do I join them and bet that I was wrong and there's some chance here, or bet that the opponent might screw up in some way that still allows us to win? Or am I
Mm.
going to do this thing that might have a chance of saving us by doing something completely different? And then I get completely flamed if I misjudge the situation.
Yeah.
Um,
It was a great game. It had, like lots of really cool design things that game tried, but it was also, I guess, on topic for our conversation. It was a very toxic game in terms of just being. It brought over a lot of traditional MOBA players, and that's something that I remember dealing with in Heroes of the Storm. Because when you try, especially when a game like that tries so many outlandish design ideas, like it basically took the MOBA formula and then it had some crazy stuff happening. Like you had like one character that would stay in the base and then psychically project himself onto other players. You had another character that was meant to die quite a lot. Murky, I'm talking about, where he would die quite a lot and then respawn like 3 seconds later, and that was his loop. And so many different ideas. You had like I think Ragnaros was like he would actually take the form of one of the towers on the map, and that would be where he was. So you had like all these really wacky ideas in the MOBA setting, and then of course all the players are going to have very different ideas on how to play that, right? And then you
yeah.
just like mix all that together, and then nobody really knows who's right until a meta sort of establishes itself.
Yeah, and I actually think one thing that's underrated in how difficult it became was the number of very distinct maps. Because in Dota League, you are mainly just playing one map, whereas in Heroes of the Storm, being able to enter and play a character is way easier because you do not have to learn 200 different items. You just need to learn a tenant build on one character. But there might be 15 different maps that all at the higher levels have very different strategies on how you play them well.
Yeah.
Um, so there was perhaps even more skill depth in some of these things for actually learning how to play the maps well. Um, And of course, the strategic knowledge for most players was just not up to that task at all.
Yeah. I even at the pro level, because I remember taking a trip to Las Vegas, where they were doing like the World Championship of Heroes of the Storm, and I was covering it in a media capacity. And but we got to do like interviews with the players and got to meet Tasteless and Artosis, and it was all a lot of fun. And I love the game, so it was great. But it was also very clear that no one really knew what they were doing. Like even at the top level, like everyone was just kind of guessing. Like, do we go for the creep camp now, or do we go for the end boss now? Like, and the commentators didn't know either. They were just like, well, here's what they're doing. Let's see if it works out. It's that meme. Like, it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's let's see if it works out for them.
But at what stage of the life cycle was that? Because a couple of years in, there was a bunch of strategic understanding and depth, but it did require you to like watch hour-long videos on each specific map on what's even going on this map and why do the pros play it the way they do. And you could play in Diamond League and still meet a lot of people who had no clue about those dynamics.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was, gosh, I think it was somewhat early in its cycle, but I remember the meta strategy at the time was um, around level 4 or 5, just ditching the lane phase and then roaming as a group. And so going into a lane as 5 players and trying to gank very early, and then getting an advantage on the map that way. I remember that was the meta.
Yeah. But if we go a bit from there back to the entire discussion about how certain executives are unable to see the second and third order value of games, I actually think Heroes of the Storm is a perfect example, because it was a bold, innovative game which had its own loyal and appreciative fan base. But it was only, I think it was profitable, but I think only mildly so. And then Blizzard canceled it. But that
Yeah.
game was like just one big love letter to the entire Blizzard ecosystem.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And every time something new released, it was just advertised in Heroes of the Storm. And so many people were encouraged to try out different Blizzard products they otherwise wouldn't by playing Heroes of the Storm. And so it's like, why are you not seeing this value? Or just the love from your community that this is generating? So sure, find out, does it make sense to keep it going, and at what level does it make sense to keep it going? But it just seemed so transparent that there were executives who were not looking at anything beyond the surface level value.
Yeah, I remember when they brought in loot boxes, and I'm well on the record as being anti loot box. And I like to know what I'm buying, and I
Yeah,
spent money in the game quite freely before they brought in loot boxes, and afterwards I spent no money because I didn't want to gamble for my skins.
yeah.
Yeah.
Loot box is actually a fun example when you're talking about dark patterns and ethics, because there's also something fundamentally fun about the randomness and about loot boxes, but it becomes a toxic pattern.
Oh,
So
100%. Yeah.
what I've done in certain systems, like for instance, if you were doing a pure premium game where you just buy the game up front and there's no dark monetization, I would very much be inclined to include loot box mechanics in terms of how you're getting loot, because it has some really fun things as long as you don't exploit it. And what I've done in some games is also recommend systems that do use some element of loot boxes, but then say, how can we make this fair for the player so we get the fun parts without those extreme spikes in outcome? So how can we add more predictability or lower the range between bad luck and high luck? Because if we can just make sure that you are operating, instead of in this range, you're operating in this range, so the value you get from the purchases is somewhat predictable. The exact form is still exciting, but there's also some sort of agency where over enough time you might still get what you desire. As long as you can squeeze that far enough to not be exploitative and to be reasonably transparent, then I have the experience that loot boxes can actually make systems more exciting. That's just not what they're usually used for. They're just used to have those slot machine oh, I want one more time, and I am hoping for the outsized outcome by spending these $100, and now I'll spend it again going into debt or whatever.
Yeah.
But I will say that as a pure mechanic, if you can divorce it from the exploitative elements and go very far in making it actually fair and transparent and non-toxic, there are some really good gameplay feelings with that. It's a bit like how The Witcher, when they made Gwent, that game is like hugely pay to win. But because it's not tied to an actual real money system, it feels good.
Mm. Yeah, I can see that. I think, loot boxes are on a spectrum, and, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to bring them more towards the positive side of the spectrum. I'm a bit of a hardliner on loot boxes. Like I kind of don't like them in any context, even when you're not spending real money or, I remember like, uh, Crossy Road designers would they put a cap on the amount of in-game currency that you could spend on their loot box, and I think again, like all of those implementations bring it further along the spectrum towards a more positive version of what a loot box is. But my line is pretty far along this way. I'd kind of prefer, like, I guess I believe there's no consumer friendly version of a loot box, even if it's not sort of spending real money. It's the aesthetics of it, and it's the practice of feeding into that surprise joy that that I can kind of feel cognitively, like a sort of a style of fun that I don't want to feed into. Like, I don't want to feed that wolf inside me. Inside
Yeah,
me
I
there
get
are
it.
two wolves. I don't want to feed the gambling wolf.
At the same time, I want to change it a bit because if you suppose we take all of the monetization out of it, and you have bought a game for $40 or whatever, and now you're playing it, and it's just how does this game present rewards? Then it could be Diablo style that things are randomized, and you're hoping for the exciting drop, and sometimes you find that hugely exciting drop. Or it can be, oh, I am getting a consistent amount of gold from everything, and I'm just saving for this thing I want to buy. Then, like, more than 9 out of 10 players would, whether they say or not, they would engage way more and enjoy more the Diablo style, where there are randomized drops. And if you can use something like loot boxes in a context like that, where it does not economically exploit the player, but it just adds some variation, like you're still going along the same progress curve over time, but the exact stuff you get at the various points is a bit more unpredictable and exciting. And if there's something you really want, you can generally get it. Then I would say, for the most part, that creates a more exciting experience. I had an experience as a systems designer, something like that, when I was working on the second Forced game. We had to do dailies, which meant that we had to make everything, randomized, but consistently so for every single player to behave in the exact same way so they could try what score they could get on a level. And what one of the engineers did was take my system for coin drops, and then make it completely consistent. But he had actually changed the curve. So instead of sometimes it's spiky, and so, like, say you kill 20 enemies, one of them might drop 6 coins, and a couple might drop 2, and a bunch drop none, stuff like that. It was way less spiky. So you just had this studio of running and picking up like 1 or 2 coins from every single enemy. It was never really exciting, and it was just like a duty to pick up way more shit. And it was like, well, it's the exact same amount of coins. Yes, but you changed the distribution. You took the excitement out of it. And that was a pure single player game, except that was this daily experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in that context, in that type of game, it makes more sense. And there's randomness in every game, even competitive games. Even Counter-Strike has randomness in the formation at the start. I guess when you describe that kind of a system, that doesn't really appeal to me personally. The sort of the randomness of loot in a Diablo-like context. But I'm not a Diablo player. I don't play those games. So I much prefer like a Souls-like, where it's like I beat the boss, and Souls games definitely have random loot. But like when you have a sort of boss fight and you get the particular soul from the boss fight, and then what you
Yeah.
can do with that.
Yeah,
What
that's a
sort of
good answer.
weapons.
The way more handcrafted experience.
Yeah, like the achievement of the challenge met, and I know what I'm going to get from this, but it's still hard to get it. And then other games have sort of taken that further, like Lords of the Fallen, where it's like, okay, after you've mastered the boss, then there's another level where it's like, okay, if you can beat this boss without rolling, then you'll get a different sword, which is more powerful.
Yeah, I think it depends on the context of where you want and choose to apply it. So take Dragon Age 3. I really think the loot system, which was random, ruined so much because there was just this basically incentivized reloading a bunch to actually get the stuff you wanted, and more or less all the best stuff you wanted was just random drops, so you couldn't be sure to ever see it. Had they instead copied something like a loot system from Baldur's Gate, whether 2 or 3 or whatever, where there were way more handcrafted scenarios of you get this loot at this point, it would have been a way better game. So those are two different approaches, and they each have the advantage for different systems. And I think the more you have like a somewhat linear story-based crafted experience, the more having a high amount of crafted hand-picked loot makes sense. Whereas if you have a live game over time, then instead of just farming currency for completely predictable rewards, having something with some random spikes and excitement can make sense.
I found one thing that you said interesting earlier that I wanted to just briefly spend a bit of time on, which is the commendations that people would give to other players was kind of like a note-taking system. I've felt that when I've played games before of like, I wish I could remember this person. Sometimes you friend them on Steam or whatever. But you don't have the context for that. And as a week or 2 weeks later, you don't remember it. So it's great to have that sort of like automatic note-taking system done for you. And there's also kind of like a cognitive element to that because, I guess if Robin Dunbar were here, who came up with Dunbar's number, which most people know is like, the limit to how many friends you can have, which is usually quoted as it's 250 as this sort of cognitive limit. But really, if in Robin Dunbar's book, Friends, he talks about these concentric circles of like closer and closer relationships of friends that you can have. But that's pretty illuminating to read just in the context of our lives. Like this, these are the amount of acquaintances that we can cognitively support. These are the amount of close friends. These are the amount of faces that we can recognize. And then when you think about that in the context of playing a game like a MOBA or a Counter-Strike or something like that, of course, there's no way we can remember the hundreds and hundreds of additional people that we come across. So this is kind of like but at the same time, like I don't see myself opening up a database and writing notes every, after every game that I play. Like it's probably just not going to happen. So it's great to have this like note-taking system keeping track for you. What's the database on the back end like for that? And like how many sort of degrees of separation are you keeping track of? And what's the extent of like, the moments that you record, like, because I know you mentioned before, like it was recorded, like whether you save someone's ass or not, but how detailed is that? Like, does it record when someone like clutches at a boss or a revive or something like that?
So we did not get into that part. When I was designing the system, it was on a game that ended up being forced to do a pivot to become a different type of game. So this was a system we had engineered and approved, but we had not actually implemented it because we were still in the testing stages where we did not need these systems yet. And then by now it has become instead the game called Vault Breakers by BetaDwarf, which is still in testing stages. I mean, you can sign up to be part of the tests. And I really enjoy the game, but it's no longer the type of game that needs this system. And I've just been so sad to see it not actually go live or even into a form, because I expected that once we launched it, it was something others would want to copy.
Was there much conversation about how portable this was to a PvP system? And do you have any opinions on that?
I think it can definitely work in a PvP system because you're still matched with people on your team, and the fundamentals of who you want to play with will still work just fine. I mean, there are certain aspects where it can work better or worse in some systems. Like we determined when building a friendshipping-oriented game that 3-person teams was optimal. That feature is harder to replicate when you're playing on 5-person teams. It will still be to some extent, but it will not be as intense. Likewise, just the baseline level of toxicity is going to be harder in a PvP context.
Absolutely.
Another concern that some people mentioned was, what if you go to so large player bases that you are rarely seeing the same people again? So instead of like 500 people concurrently matching, you have 50,000 people or something like that. And And being someone who has designed a bunch of matchmaking systems, I will say that the more people you have, the more freedom you have to just matchmake according to whatever criteria you like and still create good matches. When you have few people, you have to compromise more, and you cannot do as many tiebreakers in favor of having the people with those that they love playing with. Whereas if you could choose from 1,000 different matchups that would all be quite valid, then suddenly you can tiebreak a bunch more to make some of this happen.
From a mathematician's point of view, like as the player base size increases, do the degrees of separation also increase, or do they actually get smaller?
Of course, first degree, you directly reward them, do that. But also the second degree, that someone you are friends with, or some guild member, or someone you gave commendation for something similar, also rewarded that person. That would make sense. But going any further degrees than that, I think would be counterproductive. And what you would see in a really large player base, mathematically speaking, would be that the amount of first degree validation and also the amount of validation from any given one person would be lower because people less frequently meet each other. But the amount of second degree validation will increase because you're just interacting with so many more people, and that person is also interacting with so many more people. So it will be milder validation, but I think second degree validation can still be quite good and at least better than baseline.
You talked about when you join a game and the first thing everyone sees about you is 1 to 2 pieces of social proof. But I was imagining in a smaller player base, you might come across a situation where if everyone has social proof, no one has social proof. You know, where it's like the sort of if everyone I come across has a stellar resume, then no one does, and the sort of signal gets lost in the noise. But if you had a larger player base, maybe that would happen less, just because you'd come across, it'd be more of, if you see a social proof, you maybe 1 out of or 2 out of 5 players that you come across in any given match might have that social proof.
Yeah, the goal would be to have everyone have some sense of validation. And the more it ties to your own actions and your own personal judgments, your own ego and investment, the better. Because there's a huge difference between going into some place where everyone just has some made-up resume and counts for nothing. Say, if, for instance, Coursera certificates were super cheap and meaningless to get, and everyone just has them, then say, oh, I'm not going to assign anybody to that. Versus going to some concept where I say, okay, all of this is either first degree or second degree validated by me. It is fundamentally different. I agree completely that having it on everyone, you will start to notice it less, but just the baseline level of respect and acceptance should still go up.
In your original post, you talked about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how it obviously changed the sort of development of the game. And for us over on the other side of the world, what's that been like?
So, I mean, of course, there were some people who felt it very clearly on their personal lives. So, as a European developer, you work with a lot of different cultures and countries. So, I've lost count of how many countries I've worked with people from, perhaps 30 or something like that. And when you suddenly have a Russian developer who is like not part of the evil cluster of Russians, just a good person who lives in Russia, and suddenly you have to like find ways to pay her in cryptocurrency because of all the blockages and stuff like that.
Right.
Those people are way more affected, right? But what affected us is not so much that the war in Ukraine was a big hit on the industry in general, but we're just coming off of the COVID surge to the entire industry. I mean, I think game industry stock fell by like 20% the day the first vaccine got approved. So COVID was a big surge for the game industry. And then suddenly the financial world got thrown into turmoil because what hit us was not so much the war in Ukraine directly, but the fact that suddenly we were facing, instead of a boom, a recession. It was both cool and also kind of frustrating that those investors said, we were the example they were throwing on for everyone else, saying, we had these guys. Even these guys cannot get investment right now.
Right.
And it was just because they had all these other investments going, and all of it was just going up in flames, and they had to just use their money to make sure that this thing didn't burn down everywhere else and putting out fires. So suddenly all of the money just dried up.
Yeah, it's a shame. I guess, in terms of seeing your creation, the sort of friendship engine, enter the world. I guess it's up to other people now to kind of take that philosophy and that process and just put it into their games and maybe provide some empirical proof that it works. I guess that's the next step for this.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily a lot of it is inherently aligned. I mean, just making it easier for people to follow up with the friendships they already establish. There's only so many ways that can go wrong and not just be a huge boon if you can execute on it. Um, and for much of the other stuff, actually finding out what is the impact going to be, I think is a bigger question than will it be positive or negative. Because it seems pretty obvious, and I think that's also why many are reacting to it, that this will move the needle and quite likely significantly in the right direction. But the exact amount of payoff you can generate in terms of healthier communities and less toxicity remains to be seen, and that also depends on how well you execute on it, and will likely also vary a bit between the specific games. But it's been interesting to see that there have already been reach out to me about people who want to use it and wanted permission to use it. And I also just gave everyone blanket permission to please steal this, please bring it out into the world. I do hope to hear people's stories about how they're using it. And if they need help or consultants or anything of the sort, then by all means, reach out. But I'm excited to see what people make of this and how this can grow. Because I think more than any specific solution, it was even more of a strategy that a lot of people saw potential in, and that they're going to be iterating on and making even more of in the future to come.
I guess coming up with some empirical data and doing some sort of scientific experiments on how much how much it quantifiably reduces toxicity. Do you foresee any problems with like quantifying toxicity? Like, how would you go about that?
Ah, that's a fun question, and one that I would ideally like to think about for a few minutes before I do it.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, there's a bunch of different metrics. I think fundamentally, I would like to look at how much are people enjoying the game. One of the things we want was also doing some sentiment analysis on the chat to see is this a positive or negative experience to some extent, and also sometimes just querying the people how much are you enjoying the game right now. You can see that both in metrics. You can also do some explicit queries, and then combining that, have some idea, have your system learn which people are enjoying themselves right now. And some of that is going to be just, are they on a win streak or a loss streak? But trying to divorce it a bit from that and see how is the community affecting their experience right now, and can we understand that better? There are a lot of simpler ways to go about it, but I would try to also establish that level of understanding if I had the resources to. And that was also the ambition on the project we were doing. And then the more you get that understanding of just how are people enjoying themselves, you can find these correlations that, new people have a better experience when they get matched with these people. Well, these people are obvious positive influences in their community and great teachers or whatever. Let's match them with new people more frequently, and hopefully they also enjoy that. Otherwise, they probably shouldn't be the one we do it with, right? But I know I love teaching, and I know a lot of other people just really, really enjoy taking a community they love and bringing new people into it and giving them a great experience. And the more you are able to quantify that in your system some way and do that. And now I'm kind of speaking about the opposite of toxicity, but I really think that might be the best way to go about it. How do you create communities that are just not toxic, but that thrive and build meaningful connection? And then, of course, there's also the people who say your mom should get cancer, and what do we do about these? But the more you can create just thriving communities, then toxicity should already decrease. It might be worth measuring on both fronts, both negative and positive. But if you had to choose one, I would actually measure even more on the positive, as long as you're still dealing in some way with the extreme outliers who get reported for destroying experiences.
Absolutely. Well, Einar, thank you so much for spending the time to go through your implementation and your process and opening up that system to the world. And I really do hope people take that and run with it and do the scientific experiments on it, and then give that proof to the world, and then we have a whole new way of looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, Thanks for having me on. It was great fun, and I've really enjoyed the response from people, particularly in the industry, who are eager to also explore this. So I'm looking very much forward to seeing where this goes.
And if anyone's using the techniques, then get back to Ejnar and let him know
Yeah.
how it's gone. Tell him your experience.
I'm really looking forward to hearing those stories.